Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Spotlight video on Bandura's social cognitive theory. So to begin, we need to take a look at the research that underlies this theory. You may recall from undergrad the Bobo doll experiment, and this is his most famous study, which really prompted his work, but he took 72 children and he wanted to see if modeling mattered for levels of aggression. So he took these 72 children and he randomly assigned them to one of three groups. So 24 saw an aggressive role model with this Bobo doll, which looked kind of like this inflatable clown. 24 saw a non-aggressive role model with the Bobo doll, basically just hanging out, interacting with it. And then 24 were in the control group where I believe they were just coloring or doing something, some seated work. And what they found in doing this experiment, that it was in fact over here, 24 of the children who saw the aggressive role model were significantly more likely to display aggressive behaviors with the doll when then left alone with the doll. And so this research suggests that having someone model behavior is much more likely going to lead to a child imitating or demonstrating that later. Even if they're just watching, they can kind of internalize that and then display it at a later time, whereas those who saw the non-aggressive role model or were in the control group did not show levels of aggression or even like new ways of showing aggression with that doll. So how does this relate to schools? Well, think about it. In any classroom you go into, it's pretty hard not to see some level of modeling, whether that be from adults in the room or even other peers. So I've seen it even in the last couple of weeks. If you think about even just sentence starters and helping children and modeling kind of the wording of things like I predict, and then coming up with some examples. I infer, I wonder, I question, and modeling that in hopes that they then will replicate it later. I see it in, foreign language classes, like a teacher teaching Spanish. Not only are they modeling how you write words, they're modeling how you say it, and modeling kind of how you conjugate verbs, all of those things, to then ask the students to repeat that. We also can see it kind of in what we call kind of just different work models, where you kind of break it down something to solve an equation. So you're modeling all of the steps to solve some type of problem or equation. We see it when we show just student work examples, like kind of mentor texts or, student artifacts that then can guide students in their own work. I've even seen it, in classrooms where we model how do you do time management, right? Or how do you make sure that you turn in all your homework through planners? And we model, okay, how do you write that out? How do you make sure that you get everything done that you need to before the next day? And we see it all the time, even just with physical activities, motor skill development, the modeling of how to do different motor skill related tasks. Just to talk us through some of this kind of social learning that Bandura talked about in his theory. I saw a really great example of this when I was watching some middle school students kind of compete. It was part of a class, but they were competing to create a new exhibit for our local children's museum. So they had to design a new exhibit and come up with a theme and pull in kind of all of these different address all these different criteria to then be selected to have the Discovery Museum actually build that exhibit for children. So I was watching their presentations because I was one of the judges, but it was very interesting to watch because you could see Bandura's theory and kind of his ideas of social learning in action. So first of all, when a group would get up to present, other students in the class were observing them. They were observing their presentation, how they were talking about their ideas, how they were marketing their ideas. And then they kind of assessed the appropriateness. They kind of assessed, okay, how is this looking? Are they kind of meeting all of the standards that have been set forth for this project? Kind of assessing, kind of on a scale of who's doing better or maybe who's doing worse. And then based on that assessment, they then initiate behavior and they choose to imitate certain things, and certainly ones that have been kind of reinforced or talked about in a positive way by the teacher. And so how will that imitation occur, right? Like, why is that occurring? Because then I certainly saw that in subsequent groups. First of all, if students are paying attention to behavior. So the teacher was saying, oh, I noticed in your presentation. So she was drawing attention to either some weaknesses or some strengths, and students were paying attention to that. Also, if students can remember what was seen or heard, well, the students were actually taking notes because they were giving feedback to each group. So that's going to help them remember what's going on and kind of the positive and negatives of each group. Do they have the capacity to reproduce the behavior? Now this gets into his idea of self-efficacy. So as they're watching this and seeing like, oh, that's a really good presentation, those are some great ideas. If they have a strong sense of self-efficacy for this project, like they believe they can actually complete this task, then imitation is likely to occur. Now, if they are watching and they do not believe they have the same level of skills or abilities as maybe their peers that they are watching who are doing a really good job, then imitation might not occur. And they also have to have the motivation to want to reproduce it. And I will say that was certainly there when thinking about the value of this, right? So they realized that it was really important and it had a purpose and it was actually going to be something that would be used in the community. And so that could kind of increase the level of imitation and wanting to do a good job, but also even just through vicarious experience. So as they watch different groups, if you see a group present in a really successful way, that's probably going to increase your motivation. If you see a group kind of flop, you're like, oh, now maybe I'm getting a little bit more nervous for our group. And so all of those things is what Bandura said could determine how much imitation will occur. Now, in this theory and in your text, it does talk about some of the flaws, and I think some of the flaws are apparent just in talking about vulnerabilities in the Bobo doll experiment. And so one of the things is that when they did this study with the 72 children, the situation involves the child and an adult model, if they were watching an adult model, which is a very limited social situation. So this was more of a lab setting. This was not based in kind of a natural setting. It was really decontextualized from their everyday lives. And so we're drawing a lot of conclusions off of something that was happening in a research lab. Also, the demonstrations are measured almost immediately after. So they watched the child then with the Bobo doll as soon as they had observed something or if they had been in the control group just coloring. Can a single exposure have long-term effects? And that's one of the questions we really have about this. And there's a lot of research out there that kind of pulls upon this theory, but I don't think I know we don't have a lot of evidence to suggest some long-term change based on just social learning and observing. So what do we think? There are pros and cons to this. So as you're going through, think about what works for you, what doesn't. So we do know it can lead to some short-term change. We have seen evidence of that. So that's always a positive. If your goal is something short-term, you need something in the immediate, like that modeling could work for you. If standardization is the goal, that can be modeled. So if you know students have to do something in a certain way, modeling that can be very helpful to kind of keep students on track and guided in a certain direction. Also, a pro for this learning theory is that it acknowledges self-efficacy and motivation, and behaviorism in itself did not. It treated students as passive learners and didn't think about their characteristics, but this one does kind of add in self-efficacy and motivation. And as I kind of touched upon, it addresses a lot of limitations of behaviorism, primarily in the concepts of conditioning, and suggests that students have agency. And so that's kind of a big push forward for learning theories. Some of the cons, it can limit creativity and originality. I would say this is the biggest drawback for me when I give even student examples from the past, or, I even model something. I find that students tend to just repeat or mimic exactly what I've done instead of saying like, here's one way. I still see a lot of the same things that I've done carried over in their work. So it can really limit creativity. It also disregards biological predispositions and students' histories. So, later in the semester, we'll talk about even adverse childhood experiences and different things that go on in a child's life or previously what they've experienced in prior grades with prior teachers. Also, what we found in research is that there's just a really weak predictability of long-term change when we look at principles from this theory. So that's what I have for you this week. I look forward to reading your discussion posts.